Do we have all the committee members here?
We have a quorum, yeah.
Oh, great. Okay, can we get started? Yeah. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Finance and Revenue Committee. We'll just get started. We have a lot to cover today. So I want to go through, first we'll do roll call. Sorry about that. So I'll hand it over to Isabel.
Thank you. Cheryl Ramirez.
Here.
Chunwei Chi. Does not look like he is here yet. Mary Lou Henrich.
Here.
Thank you. Richard Gibson.
Here.
Thank you. Jeff Goodman.
Here.
Thank you. John Santa.
Here.
Thank you. Bethany Stairs, I believe is unavailable. Charlie Swanson.
Here.
Thank you. That's everyone.
Thank you. I am going to quickly go over the agenda and just mention our objective for today. Wanted to let you know that this agenda isn't quite accurate. We switched a couple of agenda items yesterday because it made more sense to start with the distribution impact of the distribution impact of the revenue proposal first, because it's about the proposal we've already submitted, and then we'll go into revenue option proposal changes after that. And what we want to get to is a response to the board's questions, clarification of certain points that we made that probably could be communicated clearer, but also considering tweaking our proposal. So that will come in the form of a response to the board that we'll submit, and we need to submit that response by the 13th of November in time for the next board meeting. So we'll talk about some previous meeting follow-up, and I imagine Mimi will reiterate some of the things I just said. Then we'll go into distribution impact of revenue proposal. That will be Echo Northwest. Then we'll spend a good chunk of time talking about the proposal refinements. I just want to emphasize that the board did not approve or deny our proposal. They really just asked us some questions to clarify. So we're just coming back with the answers to those questions. We're not like actually resubmitting a straw proposal. I hope that makes sense. And then we'll have a break, and then we'll get into startup cost operating reserves. So that's basically the meeting. Do we have public comment today, Isabel?
Yes, we do.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And with that, I will hand it over to Mimi.
Thank you, Cheryl. Good morning, everyone. This is Mimi McDonald, the Executive Director of the Universal Health Plan Governance Board. So I would, as Cheryl mentioned, we have a very full agenda. I have a tendency to talk a little bit too quickly. So if you need me to slow down, please stop. But I wanted to start with follow-up from our last meeting. One of the questions that came up had to do with the Legislative Revenue Office regarding modeling programs. And I'm happy to say that staff and Echo Northwest were able to meet with the Revenue Office and some committee members as well. And they will be helping with some evaluation of the modeling that's happening through Finance and Revenue Committee. So that's a very significant benefit to the committee work. Some of the next points were requests for information, some regarding healthcare expenditures, questions about family size in Oregon, questions about PEB, and about the scope of work for Echo Northwest and Milliman. So I'm going to go over those briefly. And again, just make sure you ask me if there's any questions. All right, next slide, please. So this graph, this is taken from KFF, formerly known as Kaiser Family Foundation. What this graph shows is the premium expenditures of an employee versus an employer over time. So you can see that it starts way back in 1999, going up to 2025. The orange is the premiums that a single worker would pay. The blue is the component of premiums that the employer pays. And really the point of this graph is just to look at the rate of growth of those premiums and how the employer contribution is very substantial. So this is again for the individual, and then we can just go on to the next slide. Same situation, except now we're looking at a family of 4. So here you can see there's a steeper rise for the employee and how much they're paying premiums, but there's still a significant rise for the employer. And if anyone has, I put the link on the slide, so if you have a chance to look at this, you can see on the left of the slide that there are all kinds of filters that you can use to look at different types of information. So I strongly encourage people, if you've not had a chance to look at this website, it's phenomenal. Charlie.
Yeah, were you able to find, or was Echo Northwest able to find any information about something in between, like a couple, or oftentimes there's separate employer-sponsored plans for employee plus one. So
Sorry, yeah, this one definitely was single or family of 4. So sorry about that. I wasn't able to find that on this, but we can, if that's, and actually, as we go on to the next slide, when we find out how many people live in Oregon, it is an important thing, and we can keep looking for that. Thanks for the question. Next slide, please. Again, this just shows the family premiums, so you can actually see the dollar amounts, family out-of-pocket spending at roughly $3,500, a family premium contribution of $6,200, and then the employer premium, again, that's just the premium contributions of $19,000. So again, the significant amount that the employers are paying, but also the substantial amount that the employees are still paying. Next slide, please. To answer the question about what is the average Oregon household size? We got this from the Census Bureau. It's a nice size, and it even has it by county in Oregon. Average Oregon household size is 2.51. And you can see it's interesting, the distribution of some counties that have higher numbers of people in their household and some less. So again, see kind of what the patchwork that Oregon is. Next slide. This has to do with PEB and OEB, and this is from the presentation given from the PEB and OEB team. If you look on the left-hand side, PEB, the insurance type, and I put a sort of a dark blue line underneath it, 80% is self-funded, 20% fully insured, as opposed to OEB, the Oregon Education Benefit Board, that's 100% is fully insured. So in other words, they pay the insurance company the premiums and then get the benefits from that. Charlie.
do you know what year this is for?
This is the information that they gave us at this most recent presentation that they did this year. So I don't want to, so I'm going to assume it's 2024, but I don't want to misstate.
Okay. I would say it's likely 2025, but yeah, whatever. So, yeah.
Thank you. Next slide. All right. And I'm not going to go over this in detail, but I wanted to share, there was a question about what were the tasks that Echo Northwest was contracted to do and was taking on. So this is a bit of an eye chart, my apologies. But really, if we look at the far right-hand side, we can see how Echo Northwest, how the work is all sort of filtering in. If you start on the left from all of the committee tasks and deliverables, the work that Echo Northwest has been doing, and then leading into the right-hand side, which is providing revenue and taxation options to finance and revenue, which obviously we're talking about today. They're also refining the initial taxation options. That's definitely what we're doing today after getting board and community input. And then also, and we're going to start getting some of this information, conducting the distributive analysis to estimate the tax incidences for different revenue options. So really, there was sort of a question, it's like, what exactly is the scope of work for Echo Northwest? So I wanted to provide this slide. Again, mostly for reference, we don't have to go over it in detail. Thank you. Next slide. All right, and so then I'm going to present this information sort of in 2 different ways. So what we're looking at, this is the work of the Finance and Revenue Committee. And I have sort of on the left-hand side, I have the actual deliverables. You can see some of the research proposals, the groups that have been involved, and then the status we have a committee final due date and then a board final due date. So as you can see, that values and principles, you have completed that task. We have, for example, the finance needs and current health spending. This is also something that there's been the sort of target, to use that word, sorry, that we've been working with from the Optimus report, but we know that Milliman is providing a status quo present, and this is going to be presented in 2 days from now at the Plan Design and Expenditure Committee meeting. So there will be an update on the current health spending, finance strategy. You all know this is what you are doing. We want to have the committee final proposal. That doesn't mean it's the end of the road, but that means that the committee has made their decision on what they would like to recommend by December. And then the cost target, of course, is still tied in with the current financial needs. Revenue impact is what we're hearing about today. Plan reserves, we're also hearing about today. And then next slide, please. This is the same type of information, just in a Gantt chart, so people can see it in a different way. What you'll notice, I put a little star by February, because by the end of February, the Finance and Revenue Committee portion of the work will be finished. That doesn't mean that all the financial work will be finished, but it will mean that this committee's work has been finished. There will absolutely be the opportunity for people who are interested to join what will then be sorry, not the operations committee, but then it is going to roll over into the implementation and committee. And so as I said, there will still be an opportunity for people to provide input. The reason for ending in February, and I'm hoping maybe Cheryl will weigh in again with me on this, is that the decisions that will need to be made are really going to be made at the board final. And so the input from the committee can be wound up by February. So I don't know if Cheryl, if you want to add anything to that.
No, that makes sense to me. I did forget to say something in the announcements, though, that we have identified 2 additional members for the committee, and they need to be approved by the board. So they're going to come in and help us wrap this up in the last 3 months. So that, yes, this sounds right to me, and I don't have anything to add.
Thank you. And for some reason the word transition escaped my head. So the operations committee will sort of morph into a transition committee. I'm not saying it will be the same makeup, but that is the plan. And so there will, of course, still be this sort of alignment happening towards the end of the final report. And I think that is it for me. Next slide. Oh, nope, not quite. All right, so that's it for the finance and revenue side. I'd like to give just a brief update. I don't want to go too long about what the board and the other committees are doing. So the board had a great meeting with the community engagement and communications team just on this past Friday, talking about the plan for how the board members will speak about the work of the Universal Health Plan, especially as we're in this state right now where there are a lot of proposals, but there isn't a lot of final decisions. So trying to make sure that there is clarity above all, in addition to transparency. Other work that will be coming up for the board, they will review the administrative structure proposal. Once again, they're going to take a look at this revenue proposal. This is at the upcoming board meeting, which is I'm taking a look, on November 20th. They will have some other straw proposals as well. Plan design and expenditure, as I mentioned, is coming up in 2 days. And there will be that Milliman status quo report. Again, recommend people join in if you have the opportunity. A quality straw proposal will be presented at that meeting, so that should be sort of brief. There's going to be a discussion about hospital payment and also on long-term services and supports. Our community engagement and communications team also very hard at work. I would say that in addition to sort of providing that discussion time for the board and planning, there is a lot of work now. Diana Bianco has come back on board, our consultant, and the target engagement meetings are really being thoughtfully planned out. Last but not least, the Operations Committee. At the next meeting will be the Milliman Administrative Plan. Again, the preliminary proposal for administrative structure has already been approved. So it'll be further work and some discussion potentially about how it will, how the Operations Committee will continue to work over the next couple of months. Jeff?
Good. Thank you. Thank you for the update. I'd like to suggest that it would be helpful for our committee, now that the Plan Design and Expenditure Committee has done their initial status quo report on the estimated plan cost, that we get that information, the range of the dollars, to make sure that the expenses and the revenues are in the same category, same dollar range.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes, and that will all be, as I mentioned, it will be available on Thursday. Thank you. Next slide. All right, I'm going to turn it over to our Echo Northwest team.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Happy November. Hopefully you all had a good time trick-or-treating. All right, so we're gonna do a two-person tango here. I'm gonna go first and talk about the distribution impacts on the business side, and then we'll go after me to talk about the personal inside the personal side. Oh, go ahead, Will. Yeah, it looks like you had
Sorry, Morgan. Last minute pivot, right? We were going to do a little bit of a roadmap first and then go into the distributional component.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go with that.
Sorry, very last minute.
I thought the roadmap was coming after, but if
yeah.
No, sorry, go for it.
Okie doke. Let me switch to the other screen. We'll hit share. Lots of different decks today. Okay, and then I'm going to hit, boy, you'd think I would get the hang of this by now. Slideshow, presenter view. Okay. You all can see me, right?
Yep, we can see you and the roadmap. Looks great.
Oh, okay, excellent. Great. So this is just a sort of level setting, an opportunity to plan out how we're going to proceed leading up to a response due November 13th for the straw proposal. So the idea is that this meeting is an opportunity to prepare for that formal proposal, and in order to reach that objective, we decided that it would be useful to make a couple observations about what the board's feedback was exactly. So obviously, the committee got extremely useful feedback from the board. I personally, I don't think I'm alone in this. I think that the opportunity to put something concrete in front of the board and get concrete feedback on it was extremely useful. Critically, from a procedural standpoint, as I think Cheryl and Mimi perhaps both mentioned, there was no formal vote on the part of the board or anything of that nature. And so these are sort of procedurally, technically sort of suggestions at this point. They were certainly not ironclad directives. But nevertheless, there is some compulsion on the part of the board. There's some mandate to respond to the board's list of questions. And staff have very usefully, Mimi et al. Have very usefully collated those. And we'll discuss those momentarily. And as Mimi, I think, also mentioned, or Cheryl certainly mentioned, by November 13th, in time for, I think the board meeting is November 20th, there will be some sort of formal response. And I presume that that's in the form of a memo, although I'm not sure of Mimi shaking her head. So that will be in the form of a memo. Okay, so just some level setting in terms of what exactly transpired and what is going to take place before the 13th. I think I'm going to pass the mic now to Mimi, who is going to explain the process a little bit.
This one won't take anyone very long, and apologies for reiterating this, but as we know, it is an iterative process, committee to board to final report. You all are here in the, as they like to say, the very, very messy middle, where things are going back and forth. I put in the box, the board hasn't provided final comments, which is why during today's meeting, there will be a response that will come from Morgan that is providing the distributive analysis from the information that was generated from the initial proposal. And there will also be work presented that has been done by Will and by our amazing committee members about answering some of those questions. So again, that's where we are. We'll go on to the next slide.
Oh, that's me, isn't it?
Oh, that's you, Will. And I don't want to spend time on these because this is all information that we talked about at the last meeting and people weighed in. But what I wanted to make sure people had access to is the evaluation plan. So we got all the comments and questions and people were able to weigh in some, but I want people to know what the sort of the action plan is going forward. So we have general feedback, comments and questions, and then you can go on to the next slide. And then questions about cost growth, definitely questions about seniors and Medicare. And then we can go on to the next slide. And then, of course, alternative proposals. So this, again, summarizes the questions that came through. It's not a 100% exhaustive list, but it really hits the high points. Other things will be addressed as well. But I wanted this committee to know about the action steps that were being taken by Echo Northwest, by other committee members, and by staff to really address all of those things that have been brought up. So back to you, Will.
Thank you very much. So at a high level, just to, lay out the agenda of today, at a high level, I'm currently going through what is, what I'm calling a roadmap of this meeting. That's what's taking place right now. As Mimi alluded to, we thought it would be useful to discuss a little bit more and from a slightly different angle what precisely the straw proposal was that the board was responding to. We think this is relevant because it was our general sense that there are some things that simply needed to be stated more clearly. There was confusion about some aspects of the straw proposal. There were also some very legitimate criticisms, challenges, or initiative to look farther, to dig deeper into things, and to provide further explanation or rationale for why certain aspects of the plan were as they were. And so it's thought, I think that the feedback was very helpful from the board in the sense that these alternative proposals, doing away with per person premium, for instance, or doing away with the HCPIT credit for the employer tax, that these elements would help simplify the system. But obviously, this committee put those mechanisms in the revenue proposal for a reason, and it's entirely possible that something will be lost by doing away with them. So, by considering these alternative proposals, as Charlie and Richard have already made great strides towards doing, by putting them face to face with the original straw proposal, it is hoped that it'll be clear the benefits of the original proposal vis-a-vis these alternatives that have been proposed. So it seems like a very useful exercise. And in the third in a final part of this section before the break, we'll discuss these alternative proposals that have already been worked on by Charlie and Richard, such as they are. Okay, so what is this straw proposal that the board was responding to? Again, I'm just describing the roadmap, what will happen. So, as I suggested in my personal opinion, the straw proposal, though imperfect, had some really admirable qualities. And at any rate, it was a baseline. It gave the board something concrete to respond to. So we'll describe some of these salient features in a new light today, and this will take about 30 minutes. It was my sense, and I think I wasn't alone, some characteristics of the straw proposal simply needed to be explained or packaged better. It was unclear, and my sense is that as we practice, as we rehearse saying these things over and over again, and as we get feedback from different audiences, we will be able to explain the virtues of various features of the mechanism better. Some characteristics of this straw proposal might actually be suboptimal, and there might be alternatives that are actually better. And so, reanalyzing these alternative proposals will help make clear which of these controversial mechanisms, these mechanisms that have been called into question of the status of the straw proposal, might be in the former camp, that is, a really good idea, but perhaps poorly explained, versus a perhaps suboptimal idea that could be replaced with something better. So that's the notion with going through the a few aspects of the straw proposal. Mimi did an amazing job of culling the transcript of the board meeting and parsing out all the really excellent suggestions. I think I think we'll get more clarity on this in the course of this meeting, but I think that the idea is perhaps to consider various alternatives, if not in the context of the November 13th response to the board, at least at some point, before this body disbands. So obviously we have a current we have a status quo system, and we have a straw proposal that was very well defined and put before the board that had an accompanying memo and elicited a number of very useful responses. The nature of the responses was sort of piecemeal. So, for instance, one of the big alternatives was to do away with the employee payroll tax credit that an employer pays the credit, pays the tax, which is then taken as a credit on behalf of the employee. There was a sort of another distinct suggestion to do away with the per person premium. Doing away with both of these things obviously has consequences from a sort of research design perspective, or a isolating the effect of perspective. It's going to be difficult to parse out, perhaps, pulling all the levers at once, so to speak. So another alternative is to do away with both, to make, in some sense, an extremely simplified system that has neither a credit nor a per person premium. And so, I'm not suggesting necessarily that the board do this, that the committee do this, but, one sort of framework for doing this would be to set up a table of this nature, start with perhaps a straw proposal baseline that folks are used to, and from there, implement various aspects of the board's suggestions and see which resonate, which lead to an improvement, or which are perhaps crystallize the fact that the committee put those features in there for a good reason. It's my understanding that when we pass the mic ultimately to Richard to talk about some of the sort of real-time responses that the committee has made to the board, Richard will discuss an alternative that Charlie put together that incorporates sort of an all-inclusive scenario that incorporates a number of the suggestions made by the board. And so I am suggesting, and obviously this is hardly definitive, but this type of format might be one way that the board could think about its work and perhaps present the various alternatives to the board at the end of the day. I think that, Morgan, if you'd like to go ahead and discuss the distributional consequences for businesses.
Yeah, no, thanks for getting me in line here. I know we were kind of
sorry about that.
A little bit. No, my own memory of this was a little weird. So let me take that level set and let's dive into a deck that went out looking at the business impacts of the straw proposal. So let's just kind of do a couple things here about what we're looking at. So the straw proposal is looking at increases to the corporate income and excise taxes, known both shorthand from a CIT, CET perspective. We'll talk a little bit about this, the corporate activity tax, and then a new employer payroll tax. And so, oh, go ahead, Charlie.
So I think that while the corporate income and excise tax are sort of together, I think the only change that we've been proposing is to the CIT, that the
Yeah,
excise tax is gonna be same.
well, let's talk about that. I think we'll have some more
Okay.
detail, but yeah, hold that in there.
Okay, great, thanks.
So yeah, so I think the three questions we're trying to tackle here is how are existing businesses and tax revenues being currently distributed? What changes to these mechanisms is being proposed and considered to fund the UHP? And how might those new revenues be distributed under the proposed changes? And we're kind of dividing this up into kind of two pieces. First, just looking at the CET, the corporate income taxes, excise taxes, and the corporate activity taxes. And those are just small marginal changes to existing taxes and looking at the revenue distribution of amongst payers. And then separately, we're trying to then look at the employer payroll tax in the context of the existing employer-sponsored insurance payments that are in Oregon, and then the employer payroll tax, which is intended to sort of substitute those out and sort of redirect that spending and understand how the distribution may fall across different sectors as well as different firm sizes. This is important because the EPT has a series of sort of exemptions and deductions with respect to sort of firm payroll size. So it's basically trying to sort of exempt small businesses as well as to sort of deduct and allow businesses not to sort of have to pay the tax on wages of lower employees, so it doesn't change the sort of overall burden of lower paid employees. And so this is kind of really meant to sort of make sure that we're not sort of distorting sort of the tax doesn't distort the choices of firms. So let's talk about the corporate income tax and the corporate excise tax first. And so the corporate income tax applies to corporations not doing business in Oregon. And so there's no more minimum tax. This is awfully sometimes just the corporate income tax is kind of shorthand for both the excise tax, which applies to corporations doing business in Oregon. And there is a minimum tax based on income. The rate for both the CIT and CET is the same, 6.6 rate on taxable income below $1 million and 7.6 rate for taxable income above $1 million. Okay. These are Oregon's primary forms of corporate taxes, and 100% of the revenue from these taxes goes to the state's general fund. Most of the revenue generated, as you can imagine, is being generated through the CET. And I realize we have the same acronym. This should be CET. Okay, so here businesses pay the minimum tax or a calculated tax, whichever is greater, depending on the excise tax or the income tax. And so here you just see the way it does is basically trying to, for smaller businesses, make sure that everybody has some minimum level of tax due. And here is a quick chart just showing the relative distribution of tax returns for fiscal year 22 and 23 for the combined CIT, CET. And so that's roughly about in 2020 dollars, about over $1 billion in taxes. 95% of that is collected from the CET. So here's the current rate. It's at 6.6, 7.6. And so these, and Megan, who's on here, correct me if I'm wrong, but the proposed rate is a nominal increase of 3% on top of that. So the taxable income of income up to $1 million goes to 9.6, and then the taxable income above $1 million will go to 10.6. And when we apply those to both of those, we see that I know there's millions of dollars, so $1.5 billion in taxes in 2022. And then if we were to apply that marginal rate, that would go to $2.15 billion. Okay. On the corporate activity tax side, The corporate activity tax is a modified gross receipts tax on businesses with commercial activity exceeding $1 million. So it applies to both goods and services, and there is an excess for businesses located out or outside of Oregon that are doing business in Oregon. They are subject to the proportional part of their business in Oregon. 100% of the revenue goes to the state student success fund, so the school fund. The current rate is $250 plus 0.57% of the gross receipts on activity above $1 million. Nonprofits, governments, healthcare entities that are subject to Oregon's medical provider taxes are all exempt. So the current distribution of these taxes, you can kind of see here, are roughly $1.2 million in fiscal year 2020-22 with the distribution here. And so when we then think of a incremental increase of 0.1%, that moves that 0.57 rate to 0.67%. And what we see then is the additional increase of about $200 million that would flow to the UHP fund. Okay. I'm going to pause. Any questions? This should be just a little more detail on information that we've already covered, just so we can understand sort of distributionally who's paying that tax. And as we increase the tax, if we think about it, the same sort of proportionality will probably fall across these industries because they are either on income or on gross receipts. Great. Great. So let's talk about probably the more interesting part of this is in the employer payroll tax. And so it's important to understand kind of the current structure of how employers currently pay a series of taxes, and then what the proposed EPT will be on top of that. So all employers, right, are currently with paid employees, right? So and those that are paying into the state insurance fund must register and report their compensation to the state. And the state has a series of employer payroll taxes that currently sum to about 3.6% of total payroll. When we kind of break that down, you can kind of see how that is roughly distributed across the different current set of state payroll taxes. So you have the unemployment insurance fund. There are different rates depending on the type of business. And you have the paid leave Oregon. So that's 0.6 for employees and 0.04 for employers for companies with more than 25 employees. We have the workers benefit fund. So that's a penny per hour work payroll tax. And then we have the current statewide transit tax. So we're just there has been an increase as part of the upcoming bill, but basically we're modeling it still in sort of 2022 terms, where we have a 0.1% tax. So that's a little bit of background on the current structure of payroll taxes. We'll get to the proposal in a little bit, but I think it's worth pausing here and just reflecting on some statewide data on employer-sponsored insurance payments. And so I have two charts here. The first one is a look at the average total single premium per enrolled employee at private sector establishments that are offering health insurance by industry. And so basically think it is, if your company is offering employer-sponsored insurance and people are enrolling in those plans, what's the average amount that the business is paying for those individuals? Not to no surprise, right? You see a lot of clustering because everybody's probably buying from the same plans, but there are probably some small, changes, whether it's, manufacturing, some of the big companies where maybe perhaps, have a lower cost plan, or maybe they're getting a better deal at scale versus maybe things like professional services and all other, which are probably other big companies, maybe that just reflects, either richer benefit plans or perhaps just a higher cost of compensation within some of those more urban areas. I don't know the exact answer. There's probably a good research paper in there somewhere, but all for our purposes here, so we're not seeing a tremendous variation in plan employer-sponsored insurance by individuals. When we then also try to look at that same question, but instead of looking at it by sector, we're looking at it by firm size. Again, we're not seeing a ton of difference. Maybe in some of the smaller companies, you see some slight differences. Maybe that reflects the fact that at a smaller scale, you're trying to shop for potentially a lower cost plan at the margins, but again, not a lot of variation there. Okay, so those are for basically companies that are providing employer-sponsored insurance plans, and so the sort of additional context here is then with those numbers is to understand what percent of those firms do not offer health insurance at all. And so to no surprise, right, the distribution of firms that aren't offering it are clustered in the very small companies. Particularly in companies with less than 10 employees, but you can see the vast majority of over 90% of it is in sort of companies less than 25 employees. Okay, so also need to make sure we also are paying attention to the sort of federal context here. So there are state payroll taxes, but I think as everybody knows, there is also federal payroll taxes that fund Social Security and Medicare. You see there's both an employee and employer rate that match total wage structure, and probably not surprised to anyone there. And so let's go then to our current proposal that went to the board. You see our sort of current rates for employers, unemployment insurance, paid family leave, workers' benefits, statewide transit tax. We also then have the federal part on top of that, and what the proposed rate for the sort of kind of tax in lieu of the ESI payments, as we looked at it back to the board, was at 11% of total payroll. We then set a 200,000 firm threshold size for those that would have any payroll tax liability. So I think it was basically anybody below, in that sort of probably fewer than 1 or 2 employees would not have EPT exposure. And then we would have a standard, think of it as a standard deduction of earnings at 100% of the federal poverty level for positive payroll tax liability. Okay, and so in 2025, 100% of the federal poverty level is about $15,600 in wages. In 2022 is what we use. That was roughly about $13,600, just for context. Okay. So when we ran that analysis, the additional revenue that would be generated from the EPT tax of 11% was about $8.8 billion. And so again, the point of that was to raise the revenue, which would then be used as a credit. And so the next slide here shows us what the payments would look like by sector. And this really is a reflection of where the wages are in Oregon with respect to the threshold, firm threshold of 200,000, as well as the 100% of federal poverty level. And so the tax would be sort of really generated in sort of the manufacturing and the healthcare and social services assistance sectors, and then varies by other sectors. But I think the thing that many folks were more interested in is by firm size and where the contributions would be coming from. And so the big takeaway here is the single largest contributor, so about 30, almost 30% of all the revenue would be paid by companies, by very large companies, those with over 1,000 employees. Between sort of 20 to 1,000 employees, we see kind of a very similar sort of spread in terms of payroll contributions, and then some contributions for, I would say, more highly compensated small firms in the sort of 20% and below. Go ahead, Cheryl.
This is a very minor point, but I'm just noticing the 5 to 9 is missing the bar for 5 to 9 employees.
Yeah, okay. Maybe there's a reason. Megan, are you on? Is there a reason for that, or are we just, is that just
I think that there is a typo on the 0 to 9, 0 to 4 category that should be
Okay.
0 to 9. Sorry about that.
Great. Thank you for the clarification and good catch, Cheryl. Great. Well, that brings me to the end of the sort of the distribution pieces. And so that we have here, I want to take any other questions, but the idea here is that we will continue to sort of refine this, dig deeper where you have questions as the proposal evolves moving forward. Okay. There may be questions later, but otherwise, I'll just pause a little bit here. We're good? Okay, great. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Will to cover the personal side. Oh, Mary Lou.
Okay, if in those 1,000+ employees, is that broken down anywhere? Was that on the previous slide about the type of business? I'm thinking,
Yeah, I see where you're going.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, Megan, are we able with the precision and our of the data to look at a crosswalk of firm size by sector?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great.
Great.
We
can
will,
do that.
we'll produce that. And I assume you want to really look at sort of the services side and some of the large firms and the retail's personal services.
Well, I was actually looking here at healthcare and social assistance,
Okay.
which is such a large group, on this slide. And if we are really talking about really upending the insurance system and just a bunch of the stuff, it's a place where I mean, I happen to know, having started Care Oregon, we were very small. Now they're over 1,000 employees, so they're in that group and other folks. And so, kind of like if they don't exist in the same way, or they're much smaller, or I don't know. Just kind of just looking at that was an interesting thought. So we don't have to go down that rat hole, but
No, yeah, we got some good context. We can do that crosswalk.
okay, great.
John.
Yeah, thanks, Morgan. Just to clarify, in many of the comments, specific large national companies were brought up. So Walmart, Amazon, Dollar General. Could you just clarify, where do these companies fall out in terms of this analysis?
It's a good question. Megan, do you know offhand? Most of those would fall within the retail sector. And so that's in right here, retail trade.
Yeah,
Yeah.
your larger corporations are going to be in your retail trade or wholesale trade, depending on their primary activity of business. Like we can't say like specifically which ones are falling where, but
Yeah, the data we
in
have
general.
from the state that allows us to look at firm level wages doesn't have any identifiers in it.
So it sounds like we can't answer the question of would they still be able to avoid much in the way of support by having large numbers of low compensated employees.
Yeah, so we won't be able to, we can't estimate the incidence and contributions of any specific company. I think the best we can do is what Mary Lou suggested, is kind of a crosswalk of industry by firm size.
Okay.
Okay. Great. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'm going to flip it over to Will. All right. Let me bring this down. All right.
I guess I had one quick question.
Sure.
Kind of about that So for example, let's use the Walmart example. When you're looking at those revenues and those other charts, are those just employees in Oregon? Or,
Yes, these are just Oregon employees.
okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on to individuals. Slideshow. Presenter view. Okay. So again, here the idea is that we're having a discussion about the straw proposal as it was sent to the board on the 24th of last month. In order to give a little bit more context about what it is precisely that the board was responding to. And also, I might add, I mean, I think that, beyond the proposal itself, again, just putting something out there allowed us to develop a framework for presenting our results. So I think that some of the things that, came up in the context of the straw proposal will be useful going forward, even if certain aspects of the proposal itself are not. So, and in particular, I think this idea, which really, I think, again, like most good ideas, had its genesis with Richard and Charlie. The idea that we have a sort of before and after, a status quo comparison relative to what healthcare contributions would look like under the proposal is an extremely good one for grounding, the practical implications of the proposal. So the question that we put together in the late hours before the board meeting 2 weeks ago dealt with precisely this. So there were a number of scenarios. Richard has I think the list is perhaps 39, maybe I'm mistaken, different scenarios. That is individual life circumstances, various types of individuals, and what their healthcare contributions look like currently and what they will look like under a prospective proposal. Putting together that kind of graph, I think, really crystallizes what the implications are for individuals. So, so the overview of this section looks like this. What are individuals' healthcare contributions under the committee's tax proposal? As I just noted, or as you might have gleaned from what I just said, there are an infinite number of permutations of considerations that are possible. How one's contributions will change, of course, depends on her circumstances, one's circumstances before in the status quo, and on a number of clearly defined parameters under the proposal. And so, talking in great generality is difficult, but a small number of salient illustrative examples is helpful for grounding and for thinking about the implications for particularly interesting cases. We'll also say what we can about some general relationships between household characteristics and the proposed tax contribution. Again, we're focusing right now on the proposal as it went before the board. I'd like to say a few words about the progressivity of the proposed tax plan, because my sense is that a lot of the proposals, a lot of the suggestions that were put forth by the board, and the value of those relative to the straw proposal will hinge on questions of progressivity. So I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page about what that means. And I want to, because we haven't really effectively done so for the group, talk about progressivity of the specific tax plans and how we're going to represent those going forward. I'd also like to point out a couple of what I call pathologies of the proposed individual tax plan. One of them became immediately obvious, I think, in a comment from the general public about discrepancies, perhaps, or perhaps slightly different treatments in self-employed versus individuals who work for a corporation that pays for health insurance on their behalf. So So how will the UHP proposal affect individual households, both in terms of their contributions and benefits? Well, naturally, as I suggested, the answer depends on their the household's healthcare status, coverage in the status quo, and their proposal relevant characteristics. Obviously in the status quo, someone could have a plan that has any number of different premia structures. They could be uninsured or insured. Um, under the proposal, the outcome set is much different, right? So under the proposal, the contributions will vary by a set number of um, fixed parameters, fixed characteristics of the households in question, and that's, I think, precisely one of the virtues of the system, right? That it eliminates all this haphazard treatment of ostensibly very similar individuals. So under the proposal, the contributions to the universal healthcare plan will vary by, of course, by AGI, by the number and age of household members, at least again under this trial proposal, by self-employment status, by Medicare status, and in a way that is somewhat complicated. And I think there's been a lot of pushback on this, in terms of the Dollar Generals and Walmarts of the world, in a way that that depends on the workforce of the person's employer. Okay, so I think there's my sense is that there is a desire to move away from that sort of that dependence on things that aren't relevant to the employee in question. So I'm sorry, sweetheart, baby, could you go? How will healthcare contributions change under the proposal? There's a vast number of possible permutations. Richard and Charlie in particular have been very good at pointing out that we can identify some special cases that will help illustrate the impact of the revenue proposal on the contributions that individuals make in the status quo and under the proposal. So I want to highlight that what we're going to do is look at some specific cases that were identified sort of by committee as being particularly salient for understanding very important groups in Oregon. And particularly Richard has gone through and looked at a likely case based on estimates drawn largely from KFF data about what a sort of typical status quo healthcare plan might look like, whether it's an ESI plan provided through the employee's employer or by a plan that she obtains through the market. Okay, so these are based on estimates. Obviously, we want to abstract from particular individuals who work at particular companies or anything of that nature. So the cases that we want to begin with, again, it was very much putting together the plane at the last minute or something before the board meeting, and some of the descriptions of the scenarios could be more helpfully recast, I think. But the idea is that there, in the first two instances, the first two scenarios, this machinist has morphed, I believe, into an educator. But the point is, there is in the status quo, there is a distinction to be made between, and I hope that Richard or somebody will chime in if I'm incorrect here, but I think the notion is that if you have an otherwise identical individual who works for a small corporation, and small meaning that the total number of employees is less than 50, versus an identical employee who works for a large corporation with more than 50 employees. I think it's the bargaining power, presumably, of the corporation vis-a-vis an insurer to lower the price of the contributions. So that's the sense right here. So there's some confusion about this. Maybe by pointing it out, perhaps I'm introducing confusion. But there was confusion about what we meant by a small versus a large firm. And what we mean specifically here is relevant for the status quo and the contributions that someone might make under the status quo. Okay, so in general, we're going to go through 5 distinct scenarios, 5 different fictitious individuals who have specific, representative life circumstances, and what they earn under the status quo is based on an estimate, an empirically derived estimate drawn largely from KFF. But their contributions under the proposed straw proposal are deterministic. They are defined by the characteristics that we've outlined in the next slide. So we have some typical, in a pretty precise sense, employees that are currently called machinists in these slides that make $65,000 a year. The average, I don't think it's the median, the mean income in Oregon in 2023 was $63,000. So it's very much a typical labor in the time frame we're looking at. And then we have a corporate executive, not naming any specific companies, who works for a large company that is presumably capable of exerting some bargaining power versus its insurer. And then we have, I think, to make some interesting comparisons, we have a self-employed business consultant that's going to make a similar, rather high salary. And then we have a self-employed farmer on Medicare. Again, some of the suggestions that were made by the board are going to change the treatment of, I believe, Social Security, the treatment of Social Security income in particular, and that will change the calculus relative to what we're showing here. But this is the baseline. This is where we're starting from, and it gives you a sense of what it was that the board was responding to. So here's the graph that was made quite late at night, the night before the board meeting, with a tremendous amount of input from Richard. Much thanks to him and Charlie. So again, apologies for calling this person a machinist. I think I did at least address one concern, one source of confusion. The machinist formerly worked for a small company, which might mean perhaps a company that pays less than $200,000 in payrolls. But what we really mean here is that they have less than 50 FTEs, because that's relevant for the status quo expenditures. Okay. I'll quickly flip by the small print, perhaps, if that's interesting. But again, we have these 5 representative scenarios, I think is a nomenclature we've landed on. And Richard is working on a much more expansive list, but these are, I think, really representative. Okay, so we have a machinist, 65,000. We're going to vary then the household size between 1 and 2 individuals. We have a well-paid, relatively well-paid corporate executive, a similarly well-paid small self-employed business consultant, and then a farmer who's earning $65,000 in other income, self-employed income, and $24,000 in Social Security income. Again, the presumptive status quo insurance type, if that's really of interest, perhaps I can point you to the fine print that will be in these slides. I think I've suppressed them in the presentation itself, but they're in the slides that went before the board and also in these slides. Okay, so the proposal here, the proposal in terms of presentational format, is to have a column that indicates the status quo expenditures and the contribution that would be appropriate. That would be calculated under the given alternative. So in this case, again, the status quo. I've got the employer contribution here, and then the individual contribution here. So the total. So just to be clear, so here's the first example, the machinist that works in a small shop. This person has on their behalf, it looks like $8,800 approximately paid on total for their annual health insurance coverage. 2,300 of which is directly paid by the individual herself, and 6,500 is paid on her behalf by the employer. And again, one issue that perhaps merits further discussion as we put together our final report is this notion of incidence, right? So in some sense, the sum of these two figures, this 6,500 and this 2,300, are all benefits that the employee is receiving, right? It's also the case that the employer the employee could be equally well off, if say 1,000 of this 6,500 is transferred to her, so that she directly pays it to the health insurance company, and uh, her salary is increased by 1,000, right? That would leave her indifferent. The point I'm trying to make is that the incidence of who actually pays these things is a complicated question. And it depends on the labor elasticities of demand and supply for these two things. But that's an important issue that does need to be kept in mind. Okay, so I'm just going to flag that right now. Again, focusing on this first example, $8,800 approximately under the status quo. For this very sort of typical employee making just about the mean Oregon income in 2022, this person would contribute less. Well, I think I'm repeating something that will be made perhaps more clear on the next slide, but we'll make it here while it's in front of us. This person will see that their direct payments decrease from $2,300 to approximately $1,500. And the total contributions that are made on this employee's behalf go from 8,800 down to $7,000. Okay, so there's a decrease both in the direct contribution that the individual is making and in the overall contribution. Yes, Mary.
My question is it because I don't understand exactly the 11%, how the 11%, I'm assuming that's the number you used for the payroll tax for this, on behalf of this machinist. And because if I multiply 65,000 times 11%, I get a bigger number.
Precisely.
And is it because of the way it works so that it doesn't start at 11? I mean, something's excluded before we get to the 11%.
So I think it's the non-refundable business is probably that may be important to. So you're right. So if you multiply
It's also the 100% FPL is deducted.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Charlie, is that where you're going?
Well, actually, a big part of it is the first portion of the firm
The
payroll is also
200,000.
not taxed. So both things come into play.
So the 200,000 thing and okay.
Right.
All right.
Yes,
So
both of those things.
yeah, okay.
Yeah,
That's
okay,
that's
yeah.
what I don't think.
So for clarity, right? For a person, for a single household, I think the federal poverty level is $18,000 in 2022. So that would be deducted. It would be exempted in that language. So that would be exempted, right? And then you would apply the balance, right? To the $50,000 times the 11%, right? That you mentioned.
Well, but you also have taken into account the firm size. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was my question. I think I knew the answer, that it had something to do with that behind the scenes first stuff with the size of the company and or the amount. And okay, thank you. Just wanted to clarify.
No. Absolutely. No, I think this is precisely what the board conversation also pointed out, that this is complex, right? And which doesn't mean to say it's not the best way to go about doing things, but we certainly need to do a good job of explaining it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yes, I thought you were asking specifically about this 2,300 number. Okay, yeah, but
I was asking about the 11% when the 65,000 times 11% is not 5,655 over in the column.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, if I may, I'm sorry. I hope I don't confuse us more, but I do want to point out this. So this is the other thing, right? That so the firm, let's say that the federal poverty level is 15,000 just for so the taxable, and assuming again that the total employee exceeds the $200,000. So everything is taxed. Okay. So you would take out the 15,000 from the 65,000, then you would apply the 11%. Charlie, sorry, Charlie, do you want to go ahead?
I mean, so no, the firm threshold exists for all firms. So even if
Yes.
you're way above 200,000, you still take off that first 200,000. So it
Okay.
still affects the tax rate.
Okay.
I mean,
Yes.
otherwise there's a jump. Otherwise there's a fiscal cliff. So
Yes, no, exactly right. Yeah, thank you very much. To get to the to get to the point, I suppose that I was trying to make is that the all of that is charged is credited back to the to the right. It's a credit that the employee takes, right? So this number in essence will never be larger than, for somebody who works for an employer, will never be larger than the per person premium under this plan. Charlie, is that sensible? Sorry, you're on mute.
so and yeah, I'm just hoping we can move along enough so we can discuss some of these things at some
Oh,
point.
yeah,
So
yeah, yes,
yeah.
So,
Thank
I'll
you.
just keep moving. I'll keep moving. Yes, fair enough. Yes, okay. So, okay, so these are the observations I think we need to make at this point. I'll get to the slides. Takeaway number one I had is that, a worker with the average state earnings who is covered through an employer sponsored insurance, like approximately half of Oregonians currently are, will contribute substantially less than they currently pay in the status quo. One could take this as indicative of the fact that the plan reduces individual contributions in aggregate. So for the bulk or for a sort of representative person, they are paying less under the proposal, the straw proposal, than they are under the status quo. In contrast to the status quo, this typical Oregonian will contribute substantially less than a high earner who makes 4 times as much. And I'm not sure if this is totally clear, but the idea is that in the status quo, somebody who in the status quo, the corporate executive who makes $250,000 will have a plan that looks just like the a laborer who earns a quarter of her salary. Under this plan, at least there's some element of progressivity into it, right? So the typical Oregonian will pay less out of pocket, and her firm will pay substantially less on her behalf, right? Again, for the reason you pointed out, that 11% applied to the non-exempt $250,000 is much less than the exemptions taken out and multiplied times the $65,000. So the proposal replaces a regressive system with one that is significantly more progressive. Okay, takeaway number two, consider two persons with identical pre-tax income. One is self-employed, the other it works for a company. The self-employed individuals in the status quo are so in the status quo, and for that matter, under the proposal, the two individuals' total contributions, that is the sum of what the employer and the employee herself pays, are approximately equal. Okay. Under the proposal, the employee's direct contribution is effectively capped at the maximum per person premium. That's $4,000. And so this is not unlike ESI contributions in the status quo, right? They're capped at whatever the premiums are in the health insurance plan. But as her income grows, the direct contribution under the proposal for the self-employed individual will grow at 9% until the soft cap is reached, and then it reduces down to the lower rate, 3%, I believe 3.5%. So, but the employee payroll tax paid on behalf of the employee, in contrast, will continue to grow at a constant 11% rate indefinitely. So there's no soft cap on the contributions made by employers. Again, I just wanted to point out, quickly this notion of progressivity. So a progressive tax is typically understood as one in which an individual's tax burden, measured as the share of income that she pays as a tax, increases as her income rises. And so I'm not sure if it's helpful, but I made up a little example here. You can imagine 3 different regimes, right? You have 2 individuals. One individual earns $100 in income, another individual who earns $200 in income. In a regressive regime, say the person has to pay has a tax bill of $10 and the wealthy individual has a tax burden of $18. The effective tax rate, that is the proportion, the share of her income that she's paying as a tax is 10% in this case and 9% in this case. So this is a regressive tax. The higher one's income, the lower one's effective tax rate. A flat tax would have everybody paying a flat rate. Everybody pays 10% in this example. If the income doubles, then the tax bill doubles. So they're both paying 10%. For a progressive tax, the kind that the committee aspires to and its objectives, at least in a sort of a global scale, would look something like an effective tax rate that is lower for the low income individual than it is for the higher income individual. So the higher one's pre-tax income, the higher one's proportional contributions to the universal health care plan. So this, I think, is the natural way to represent. This is the natural way to represent this characteristic of the universal health care plan. Again, you have to set a few parameters, and then you can look across the income level to see precisely how one's effective tax rate varies with pre-tax income. And so the exercise here, again, is to look at, otherwise identical, an individual who has one adult in the family versus two adults, and this affects the per person premium. And what you see here is a system, a proposal that is largely progressive, right? So as one's income increases, one's effective tax rate is increasing, right? So the higher one's income is, the higher the effective tax rate. That isn't true once one hits the $4,000 per person premium is reached. Once the cap is reached, at that point, that $4,000 becomes an increasingly small share of a very large income. So that's the nature of these graphs. So we can make other general statements. The number of dependents and proposed and proposed tax contributions at the low end of the income distribution, and I think this was really sort of a virtue of Charlie's proposal that I'm not sure will carry over if we do away with some of these structures. So at the low end of the income distribution, having a larger family increases the federal poverty level exemption and the PPP. So the burden is less for additional dependents at low income levels. But there's a flip. There's a single crossing that takes place under the straw proposal, such that at the higher end of the income distribution, for those that are beyond this federal poverty level exemption, having more dependents increases the per person premium. So the upshot is that the healthcare contribution is greater for high income individuals, high income households as their family size increases. So to say it again, for low income families, the burden is less the larger the family is. For high income families, the burden is greater the larger the family is. So I thought that was a very slick feature of Charlie's model. I presume that's why he set it up that way. This graph illustrates that. Here again, we have different level curves, so to speak. We have an adult with 0 children, 1 and 2 children respectively. You'll see that the effective tax rate is lower. Okay, the blue line is below the green and the red line at low income levels. At very high income levels, having more children would increase the effective tax rate. It means that in this range here, this is a large and wealthy family has a higher effective tax rate than a large and a smaller and equally wealthy family. Okay, tried to speed up. No, one last observation here is that under the straw proposal, Medicare enrollees will receive a non-refundable, again, credit for their federal Part B contributions. Okay, but they still may see an increase under the straw proposal in their overall contributions relative to status quo. That's an observation that we saw in the last line of the 5 scenarios. Now, whether or not this individual enrollee actually sees an increase in their annual contributions under the straw proposal will likely hinge on their status quo dental and vision expenditures, because those are things that are not those are things that are covered under the proposal under PEB Plus, but are currently out-of-pocket expenditures in the status quo. Okay, so in the examples that Richard baked up, the Medicare farmer actually saw an increase in his or her healthcare expenditures under the proposal, but that didn't account for the fact that if they had a lot of dental or vision things. But it's still the case, and I personally found this an interesting observation. Regardless, even with a potential increase under the straw proposal, it's still the case that the lifetime contributions Medicare recipients make into the system via their FICA taxes is actuarially less than the benefits they receive. So there is still, I mean, if you're inclined to go that way, one could make, I suppose, an equity argument that perhaps this, a proposal of this nature would induce, more fair share contribution. I mean, it's probably a controversial thing to say, but it is at least an argument one can make. And that does it for my slides. It was too fast at the end. Are there any questions? Thank you very much. Let's see the run of show. Is it, I think, Morgan, I think we're on to the transition and reserves.
Yeah, I guess I'll just go loop back with Cheryl. So if there are no questions on the distribution, do you want to take a break now and then come back on the reserve question?
I think that's fine, unless people, I mean, I guess I would ask, is there discussion too beyond questions? Because it seems like we haven't done a whole lot of talking, so I would open it up. I prefer to do that rather than take an earlier break, but if no one has anything, well, it looks like Mary Lou has.
Mary Lou's got her hand up.
You're on mute, Mary. Mary Lou.
Oh. Maybe we go to John.
Yeah, still muted. Let's go to John.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a couple of things. First of all, I want to make sure that it sounds like there's been a working group that includes Charlie and Richard, includes consultants, includes staff. I'm not sure whether it includes the board members that are on F&R.
No,
I think, okay. But I think that's a good thing, and it should be documented that committee members, i.e. Charlie and Richard, were involved in the analysis that's going on. That's correct, right?
I would say they are driving. They are a catalytic driving force in the analysis, as opposed to simply just coming along. Yeah.
Well, that's good. I mean,
Yeah.
I just wanted to establish for the record that
Yeah.
that's good. And eventually, I would hope that there would be some board members who would have that kind of familiarity, because I think Mary Lou's comments about the math, are important. People are going to try and figure out the math, and so there's gonna have to be an explanation, about the math. I'll tell you the one thing I think that could be of help to me is I can Google the tiers for Part B Medicare premiums and get them in 30 seconds. There's what, 6 levels, and all. Are there tiers for the PPP? If so, what are those tiers? So, because the major concern I had here was people totally misunderstood the PPP, with some folks thinking it was a 4,000 flat contribution for everybody. And because there's no explanation really about the tiering system for the PPP. And I would urge that you might consider that tiering system for Part B, because it's out there, and we've been using it for some years, and Medicare folks have accepted it. So that would be my major question. My major suggestion would be prepared for people to do the math, and make it easy. And even like in those 5, if you had a piece available to the public, here's how we do the math, because most of the public doesn't know. Well, yeah, nobody pays the first 15,000.
Yeah.
That's free for everybody. They forget that.
Yeah.
So those were my 2 things. Thanks for the answers.
I think that's a great suggestion, John. And before we call on Charlie, I just want to give Richard a heads up that we were thinking you would present new scenarios. So I wonder if you'd be ready to do that after Charlie makes his comment. Okay, good. Go ahead, Charlie.
I mean, that's essentially what I was going to ask about, is when are we going to talk about a bit of a response to all of this? And so I'm hoping that's now.
Yeah.
Yes, that should be now. Yes, agree.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So you're on deck, or you're on right now, Richard, if you're willing to present.
Okay, so the challenge is there's a time delay. We presented what Will just presented to the Universal Health Plan Governance Board on October 16th, and they had comments. And so we've moved on and actually I think taken into consideration some of those comments. The 3 that we'll respond to here that we heard. Now, again, this committee didn't vote on it. The board didn't vote on it, but these are the 3 biggest responses to the initial straw proposal: was remove the low wage threshold so that people that are paying low wages start paying an employer payroll tax. And we can do that by raising the firm threshold from 200 to 500,000. So small firms are still protected, but that large firms that pay low wages still have an employer payroll tax from the first dollar. So that's number 1. Number 2 is we heard pretty strongly that trying to explain the per person premium was too hard to do. So we heard that. And again, we haven't decided, Charlie and I and Will and Morgan haven't decided for you all, the committee, that we're doing this. It's just that we're trying to respond with a new model and say, oh yeah, we like that one better. But still, we heard loud and clear, remove the per person premium. And number 3, we heard remove or decrease the employer payroll tax credit against the healthcare personal income tax. So again, we haven't made decisions for you. We're just responding to that. So in Charlie's new worksheet dated October 30, we use exemptions, and exemptions are a proxy for household size, but they go in 2 different directions, as Will earlier said. In the usual taxing context, an exemption, increasing exemptions decreases your taxable income, typical use of exemptions. But in the case of healthcare, where bigger families might pay more than smaller families or individuals, increasing exemptions might increase the charges for healthcare, and they go in opposite directions. And that's why we had a per person premium, but we heard that didn't work out so well, trying to understand that. So what we came up with, and this is out of Charlie's spreadsheet, and is to use a tax table with a tax lookup. And here it is. And so it combines both the idea of bigger families pay more, but it also combines that households with more people in it pay less at the same income level. And so here are the exemptions. Zero means that someone's is paying income tax, but they're included on somebody else's tax form for being exemption. That's how you get some zeros in Oregon. One person household, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 8. And then you can see that again, we're calling a per person premium here, but this is just for explaining it to you. We're going to try to do away with that term because it wasn't popular, but that's why you have these 4 tiers. Below the beginning of the per person premium phase in at 290% of federal poverty level, and then you have a tax rate, and then you get up to the top of the 580% of federal poverty level, and then you have income below that, above that. So that's why you have 4 tiers. And so you can see that you have a tax table lookup gets away from the idea of having 2 different taxes. It's all the income tax, but you have a tax table. I see Charlie's got his hand up. Go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, so I want to say that effectively this is a per person premium, but it's been chosen to be quite a bit smaller and also to not kick in until you get to the second person in the household. So it's essentially for a per person premium for everybody more than one in the household, or every more than one exemption is another way to say it. And the choice of the size of it is such that it's enough to make it so that larger families at high enough income do pay more, but also so that the rate that is paid, if you put the per person premium or this, whatever the tax tables look up, together with the HCPIT, that the rate is never more, even for the largest household, than in this case, 6.5%, which was chosen for some other reasons to go on. So it is, in all cases with a number of exemptions, it is progressive. It doesn't have that bigger bump that Will was showing earlier, where there's a point at which the large PPP becomes a smaller amount. So it really is just that in each of these number of exemptions that the effect of the low wage exemption goes away by the time you get up to high enough incomes. Like for a family of 4, by the time you're over 161,000, the low wage exemption is gone, and so the rate is just 6.5%. And I will share with people the plots of this. So that's the whole purpose of this, is to do what the pre-PP was intended to do, but to make it so that it is explained as a tax table that is, I guess, in this sense, simply makes up for the low wage exemption or the federal poverty level exemption.
All right. Let me share one more thing and see how this helps. Okay. So then we took, let's see, can I even make it bigger? So you can all can see it. Let's make it.
It's okay.
All right. Anyway, so we used that tax table, and again, any errors are my errors, not Charlie's errors. But I tried to use the tax table and come up with this. So at the top, the payroll tax is 9.5%. There's no lower wage threshold. There's a $500,000 firm employer payroll tax threshold. The personal income tax is 6.5% below and above in each. So there's no, essentially, there's no soft cap. There's no, in this case, again, no decisions made, but in this case, there's no payroll tax credit against healthcare personal income tax. So that a person who's employed would pay the same amount of healthcare personal income tax as a person who is self-employed. And then there's $890 extra for each exemption above 1. And that extra charge is applied through the tax tables and the tiers between 290 and 580% of the federal poverty level. And just to note here, in Oregon, Social Security income is not subject to the healthcare personal income tax. So that's the conditions under which this table below is. And so it's very deep. It's too tedious to go through all of them, but I just wanted to show you that the reason. So I use paraeducator at 35,000, a teacher at 70,000, a senior teacher at 100,000, an ICU nurse at 124,000. I'm no expert on wage. I'm just making it up. But the idea is to block out different kinds of income so you can see where they are in terms of paying payroll taxes and Part B premiums, which don't occur until you get down to Medicare. So as you can see, as you go up in income, you I can't control my spreadsheet anymore. Okay, here we go. Let's go over here. Anyway, this just gives you a show here that as you go up in at $124,000, a family of two pays a little bit more than a family of one. I'm looking in the total individual in column H. And then as we go up to an analyst at 140,000 and a computer engineer at 150,000. Now finally at 150,000, a family of four pays a little more than a family of two, which pays more than a family of one. So the point of showing that is somewhere around $120-something thousand, around $100,000, a family of two pays more than a family of one, and around $140,000, a family of four pays more than a family of two. And the idea is that, again, you have those offsetting things, is that the same income applied to a larger household, generally that's your typical exemption, and so your effective tax goes down, but then then as your family gets bigger, you pay more, but that's where they cross over. And then if we go further down to a senior director, $175,000, an executive at $250,000, and a CEO at $500,000, you can start to see the effect of family size. Bigger families pay more, and that gives you a sense. So the last thing is we'll come down and look at self-employed drivers. For self-employed, the numbers are the same because there's no offsetting credit for what the employer paid in the payroll tax. So that a Uber driver of one or a self-employed farmer at 70,000 pays the same that an employee would pay in terms of their own healthcare personal income tax. And then finally we get down to other income, meaning not a wage income. It could be self-employed income, it could be some investment income, and a Social Security income. And you get to see here what they pay in Part B premium and what they pay total. Again, a lot to throw at you. This is something to be studied over with a cup of coffee. But the point is that in this table, I did not do the Part B premium as a credit against the healthcare personal income tax. That's something this committee needs to discuss. There's reasons for it. There's reasons not to do it. But I just want to let you know, this is the degree to which we have some information right now, and to see what your thoughts are. And I'll stop sharing and see what your comments are.
Well, I'll help facilitate. John, why don't you go first, and then Cheryl, and I've got some other thoughts too, but go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say that either of these methodologies would be of help. And Richard, I mean, that kind of spreadsheet that you can kind of go up and down is kind of what I was looking for. But the spreadsheet and with the tax table, I think could also work. I mean, we need that kind of tool. So you're headed in the right direction.
Well, we have both. Charlie built the UHP revenue, and it gives you the 16.9 billion that was required in 2022. Then the scenarios are just an extraction from it. So you have the primary Charlie spreadsheet, and then you can create the scenarios. Thank you.
Sure.
I just wanted to note that I know we were asking Richard to do something yesterday And so we don't have I don't believe Richard has the status quo comparisons, but we see that we will do that, so you can just see them.
I do, but I just didn't want to
Okay.
take too much time.
Oh,
Okay, I'm surprised. That's an amazing feat, given that was like yesterday night. So I wanted to say that. And then also, I do want to get some clarity on whether we're going to talk about this idea of having the PPP or not, because I do think this is an important part of our response to the board, and this is the meeting to do it, since our response is due on the 13th. So I hope we do get into that today.
Yeah. And I'll just before Charlie, I'll jump in here. I think there are kind of three kind of key discussion pieces here that we want to kind of focus in on. And Richard, maybe sharing those kind of changes from the status quo would be a good sort of segue, but I'll let Charlie go here quick.
So I would say that we want to give sort of two options to the board. One is without the PPP at all, and another option with the PPP, kind of as what Richard put forward there. And we want to show why it is that some of us think the PPP is useful. And the essence is to show plots of, or maybe just tables of, I'm not sure which, of how much, what the tax rate would be for various numbers of household sizes. And those plots exist now. I mean, they exist on the tax calculator so that you can find them for whatever scenario or whatever tax plan we put forward. So they're very easy to produce. And so I think we should be going on that. I would say maybe even three possibilities, but certainly at least those two. The third possibility would be a higher PPP so that there actually is an increase above the tax rate that then drops down. But that would mean it's not progressive, but it would mean that larger income households pay more. But that third one, we can maybe leave out if people want to leave that out. But I think we need at least the two to show the effect of to show how we can make up for, I would say, the tax plan giving a huge break to high income large families. So
Thoughts on Charlie's suggestion, because I think that is sort of one of the three big things that we need to kind of weigh in on. And I think what Charlie's suggestion here is to sort of illustrate the set of trade-offs and sort of mitigation around some of the issues around sort of tax burden and contribution rates for those different kinds of households. Mary Lou, hopefully we got back.
I think,
Yes. All right.
yes, okay.
Yeah.
I think that if we can make the explanation easier so that people grasp it, which I think this is heading us in that direction, and just what Charlie said, the feedback that I've heard is wanting to be sure that high income households are not somehow safeguarded in this whole thing, that we really want it to be really progressive. We want the very lowest people to not be paying because they're not paying now with Medicaid. Then kind of the next group up, that they start paying some, and they probably are already paying some if they're employed at a larger firm, not in a smaller firm. But being able to say that this whole plan and being able to explain the pieces of it more clearly than we were the other day, that then I think people will say, oh, it does do the equity principle that we were talking about. I think that way back, I went back since I came to this committee late and actually printed off the summaries of every meeting that had from the beginning last October, and read them all and underlined things and looked at consistency across meetings and found that the principles are there, but they're basically the value of equity, I wrote them down, that adequacy, progressive, that, and also simplicity, that we could explain it. So anyway, I think this has really been helpful, but I too will need more time to print these things out, look at them, And I really thank Charlie and Richard for working with the consultants to get us and the staff to get us to this point. I'm understanding it better.
Thank you, Mary Lou. Charlie.
Sorry for that phone.
So besides the PPP piece, I still think that we might want to explore at least some part of a employer payroll tax exemption. So I know some people were not in favor of any of it, and I know the 100% employer payroll tax credit did not sit well with many, but I still think it's going to be really unfair to wage earners if we don't do something there. So I also want to explore a little, at least using having some small amount, at least, of the employer payroll tax credit. And then the other piece that we haven't really gotten very far, and it's extraordinarily difficult to do, but I might be able to make some headway on it, is the fairness for the Medicare population. It does seem like we likely need to have the possibility of using Part B contributions as a credit against the state tax obligation, at least a portion of them. And I want to be able to, the hardest piece is not putting it in. The hardest piece is estimating what revenue is lost when you do that. And I think I can make some rough headway on that to get a rough idea. And my expectation is that we might want to do something like a 50% credit or something in that neighborhood. But I think it's going to be important to look into, because otherwise I think that we're going to be creating a burden that we don't want to put on the Medicare population. So,
All right. Richard.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up for the committee's consideration specifically on the issue of the tax table lookup, because that's a change from how it was done before. And instead of just saying, well, the rate is 2%, 6%, 5%, whatever, you're saying tax table lookup. And most of us who have done taxes over the years, we're used to doing tax table lookup because that's kind of the tiering of typical income tax. And we don't, outside of this committee, we don't need to talk about a per person premium anymore because that was considered to be unfavorable. But you can just describe it as we have a tax table lookup that larger household size decreases the taxable income, and a larger household size also it offsets and increases for as size of family increases, and they're offsetting, and that's why you see the curve that Will showed. So is this committee, do you like the idea of a tax table lookup? And we don't need to talk about a per person premium. We just say we have a tax table that takes care of size of the household, takes care of the size of the household, and let it go at that.
I'll pause here and say this is a really important sort of distinction that Richard's talking about. And so think of it as, before we had sort of two components to what we'll call kind of the income tax, really is kind of this kind of fixed cost, fixed contribution per, like a head tax almost, plus a table, plus the sort of the income tax table or income tax rate. And so what Richard is saying is basically, the reason to do this is because we're trying to adjust by household size to make sure that we were getting contributions. And when you go to kind of we'll call it, I call it a marginal tax rate table, but lookup table, basically that relates two ideas, your income and your household structure, to an effective tax rate. So it's a simplification, and it's really then just saying, hey, we're just having an income tax to pay for this. So I think this is a really important distinction that Richard is raising, and deserves some discussion and at least head nodding as a directional sort of push here. Cheryl.
I just want to make sure I'm tracking. So if I'm understanding right, it's not that we're taking away this calculation by household size. We're just describing it, or we're labeling it a different way. We're not calling it a PPP.
Correct.
So I'd be in favor of that. I mean, very much aligned with Mary Lou's comments that it's the way we explain and communicate things. It just has to be really simple, so it doesn't sound like no one can ever figure it out, and it just seems like it's as complicated as our current healthcare system.
Just hit on that. The principle I think that Charlie and Richard started with was basically we should tax income, and we should also account for the fact that we have different household structures.
Yes.
And the way to operationalize it was like, okay, well, let's tax the income as income tax, but then just have this per person premium to account for household size. And what we're moving towards is simply just a marginal tax rate structure that incorporates both of these.
So I just want to say I'm good with that.
Okay, Mary Lou and then John.
Yeah, I think that I am really in favor of doing this and the idea of the tax table or whatever. I think that honestly, more people that are sitting on this committee, looking at our age, looking at, my supposed, I have no idea about everybody's income, but my belief is that we are people who probably really do look at tax tables, maybe even do your own taxes or get everything ready for some accountant and really know what you're doing. When you talk to most people, younger people especially, they go to TurboTax, they put in a number, and something in the background does something that spits out at the end, and they just sit there and wait to see, is it going to be that they're going to get the kind of refund they're hoping for? So I really think sometimes when we're trying to explain how we got to what goes on behind the scene, I mean, we're not trying to be, hide it at all, but I think sometimes in our effort to make it so clear, we make it so muddy. So I like the idea that we say it simply like you did, Morgan, that we're trying to be aware of higher income earners with large families, and that somehow they don't get off on the backs of people who are lower income people with smaller families. So I'm going well with this now.
Thank you, Mary Lou. John.
Yeah, I mean, my comment would be, I actually never saw the PPP as related that much to household. I saw it to be consistent with, well, you're paying about this much now, and as part of our scheme of funding this thing, that's going to continue, and there will be a flexibility related to income, and throughout this process, I focus mostly on Medicare. So I am very concerned about the issues that Charlie just articulated. And the Medicare folks need to understand how this is going to work for them. Because realize, I think, key to doing Medicare will be to get everybody to enroll and pay their Part B premiums, which some lower income Medicare folks who aren't Medicaid eligible have difficulty paying. That's going to be a stretch for them. And so somehow some help, and I saw that in terms of the tax credit, needs to be there for them. So just as you do this, I think we come across as being so focused on the employed folks that we forget about the individual folks. And don't forget about the individual folks, especially Medicare, because in Medicare, you've got this challenge that a lot of the country's wealth is in the hands of upper middle and upper income Medicare folks. It's kind of what Mary Lou was referring to. And those folks are going to have to contribute likely more. But we don't want to do that and harm the lower and middle income Medicare folks who I think deserve support here. So just don't forget about Medicare.
All right. Thank you, John. Charlie.
So I obviously agree with John because that's what I brought up. That's why I brought it up. But I must say it's extraordinarily difficult to get reasonable estimates of the revenue effect of providing that a credit of some kind. But I will try to do that. The other piece I will say, related to what Mary Lou said, the PPP or the tax table lookup piece is not so much to looking at high income compared to low income. It's more of looking at high income people with small families are paying a lot more than high income people with larger families, which is very much a change from what we currently happens. And so it's more related to those among the high income people and not trying to put an extra burden on small families compared to large families. So that's really where the difference is, not so much between high and low income. And overall, I would say that the tax scheme is moving a huge amount of burden onto high income people, which is, I think, what many people want to do. But that is certainly what the tax structure is doing. So,
go ahead, Cheryl. And I do want to pick up on a point here. But after you go here, I don't want to lose what Charlie just said.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, as we're heading to 11 o'clock, and I do want to take a 10-minute break, I want to ask you a question about how we're using the rest of our time, our committee time. And maybe this is a question for Morgan, Will, and Mimi, but also maybe committee members have preferences too. I want to make sure we hit those three big points that we need to clarify in our response to the board. I know we've been talking about the PPP, and I think we're there with that one. I honestly, Morgan, don't remember the two other ones, if it's something that committee members have brought up or not. So I want to make sure we get to those 2 points. And then secondly, I want to assess whether we have time to look at Richard's status quo, side by side information that he worked on, I'm sure, last night. So I just want to
So what I think
that if we have it, and maybe we can squeeze the next topic a little bit more, the startup costs.
I think so. And so what I would suggest is maybe take a short break and then come back to Richard's show the proposal. Because I think the three big ones I think we needed to kind of make sure we had some discussion on, and I think we're landing great on the PPP, moving to sort of a more marginal household size exemption structure, and to deal with sort of both the income and household size and the progressivity issues there, and contributions. So I think that feels pretty good. The thing I think probably we're talking about, both Richard and Charlie, is about moving to a scheme like that and how to think about the soft cap issue and the contribution, because you can think of it basically as potentially that structure is solving this point, but that's probably also worth talking about it from a sort of total, from an equity perspective and some of the issues. So I think coming back, we probably want to talk about that. The last thing I think we want to make sure we spend some time talking about is what Charlie is coming up with a plan. And I think maybe it looks a little bit kind of laying out some different options, is on the role of the EPT tax credit, and how to structure that. Because I think there are some the board raised some questions. I think this group has a good sense of that, but we probably need to talk about sort of how we frame that up.
Okay. So Morgan, in my opinion, those are the most important things to come back and talk about. And if we need to squeeze the startup operating reserves, or maybe even defer to the next time, I'd prefer to do that.
I think that makes sense.
Okay. Go ahead.
I mean, so I think there's two things, but there were three things, but I think we only brought up just two of them. I mean, the PPP and the EPT credit. Was the other one the wage exemption for firms?
I think that's an important one. We can kind of, to me, I think about that as sort of a sensitivity piece, right? Where it's important to think about sort of the contribution rate, and it's an important part of the big piece. But I think probably worth talking about too, Richard, Charlie, I agree. I was coming back to the soft cap piece. I think this was a thing that came up in the board conversation multiple times around you know, the sort of, particularly with the, I think, as Mary Lou said, the equity principle of how we should be thinking about the burden on higher income households and what the limits of that should be, right? And that's been the expression of the through the soft cap. So I think there's just some conversation we need to have there.
Okay,
Yep.
so let's take a 10-minute break. Well, let's meet again at 11:10 and we'll get back to these things. So thank you.
Hey Cheryl, I think you're on mute.
Yes, I sure am. If you're back and you're a committee member, could you turn on your camera just so we know you're back and we can get started? We have a lot to do yet, so I'm just going to hand it right back over to Morgan.
Great. Richard, maybe to kind of cue up the some of the conversation, do you mind just quickly running through the scenarios that you prepared just to help illustrate some of the effects of the topics we're discussing?
Sure.
Yep.
So we're going to talk about status quo versus universal health plan. And I just have 4 slides that just show you the complexity of trying to figure out the status quo. The first thing I wanted to show was that when you're talking about employer sponsored private health insurance in 2022, $7,400 for a single, this is total average premium, 14,000 for employee plus one, and roughly 21,000 for family coverage. And then on average, individuals pay about 16% of their premiums for single coverage, about 25% for family coverage. I couldn't find what they pay for employee plus one, so I just kind of went in the middle at 21%. The reason I'm telling you this is because in trying to figure out status quo, there are so many variables and the numbers aren't good. So some of it, I'm not just saying it's purely made up out of blue sky, but that it's loose and different people come up with different numbers, so you can't bank on it. But it shows you the complexity. So that's in terms of employer-sponsored private health insurance. If we go to Affordable Care Act, the premiums in 2022 for a 45-year-old, I could have picked a 60-year-old with much higher, or a 30-year-old been much lower, but it was $7,000 a year for ACA Silver Plan in terms of the unsubsidized premiums. And then depending on your income, your premiums could be reduced with a tax credit, which of course is going away in the next couple of months unless something changes. But it shows you the complexity of trying to figure out what someone's going to pay. So at above 400% of federal poverty level, you're going to pay roughly the full premium. But if you're a lower income, you pay way less than the full premium. So that's the issue of premiums. But then you also have the cost sharing. Otherwise, starting with deductibles, and again on an Affordable Care Act, depending on your income, your deductibles go down. So that at low income you have almost no deductible, and above 400% you're going to have the full deductible, which averaged in 2022 on a silver plan $4,900. And then finally, and this is just one slide, and there's a lot more to show, you got Medicare, and you got traditional Medicare, and you got Medicare Advantage. I didn't deal with Medicare Advantage yet, just too complex for right now. But what I want to say was that the standard Medicare Part B premium 2022 was $170, and at 65,000 of income, there's no incremental adjustment to pay extra for Parts B and D at that income level. Then you have the issue of the Medigap plans, and they averaged $91 to $323 per month in Oregon. And then again, I just chose somewhere in between at 207. Again, how did I make that up? Well, there's just not numbers on specific aspects of it. So I just want to do something for comparison of status quo versus universal health plan. And then Medicare Part D plan was approximately $33. Most people that have traditional Medicare have some form of prescription drug coverage, either paid by themselves or by their former employer. But it's not everybody. So I took the premium down a little bit from 33 to 25. Again, more hand waving, but I want to show where that came from. And then the issue about cost sharing in Medicare. It's a big deal. If you have a supplement, and most people 90% of people on traditional Medicare have a supplement that's either they pay or their prior employer paid. But the idea is that if you have a supplement that in many cases takes care of a lot of your out-of-pocket, again, you can buy different tiers, but I left out the cost sharing on traditional Medicare with the supplement because for some people it can be very low and it's hard to figure out exactly what that would be. So with that said, let's jump over to the universal health plan versus status quo. So across the top, we have wages, Social Security income, other income, total income, healthcare personal income tax rate or amount, Part B premium, and then the total you'd pay under universal health plan and the total you pay under the status quo. So that status quo for a person earning $35,000, using again the fact that they're paying part of their premium and part of their cost share. Those numbers, we can argue about the accuracy of those numbers, but you get an idea. You're starting to see that progressivity right a bit. In low income, they pay well less than our universal health plan. At $70,000, you're getting to be it's close. It depends on the size of the family. You pay a little less for a small family, and you pay more than you. Anyway, you get the idea that you're about roughly in the same neck of the woods. At $70,000, at $100,000, you're starting to pay more. Again, with the small family than you would under status quo. But again, and this is where, and this I was trying to show earlier, this is where, as you between $100,000 and $150,000 is where you start to switch over. You start paying more for larger families under the universal health plan. Now at $124,000, you can see that here's universal health plan at around $6,000, and then under status quo, it goes up from $2,000 to $6,000 because of the size of the family. Again, that's partly based on premiums. Larger families that are employed pay a greater share of the premiums, and they also have higher out-of-pocket deductibles and total out-of-pocket maximum for families and that sort of thing. At $140,000, again, you're seeing that universal health plan is starting to cost more at all tiers. At $150,000, costs more at all tiers. At senior director at $175,000, you're paying well more than you pay under status quo. The executive at $250,000, you can see the strong impact of the tax. So talking about progressivity, you're seeing it right here. At all family sizes, you're paying more than you would under status quo. At $500,000, you're paying a lot more. Going down into the self-employed, here's status quo. If they were buying Affordable Care Act insurance, then you pay a lot less under universal health plan at a low income. The farmer, again, this is Affordable Care Act. It's you'd have to buy two policies if you're Affordable Care Act, even under one income. I didn't do it for family because I don't know how to figure that. Affordable Care Act with 2 + 2, 2 adults and 2 dependents, that sort of thing. But you see that at that income, you're paying less than you would under status quo with the provisos. And then at $124,000, you're paying well less than you would on the private market. This is Affordable Care Act. And then the business consultant, again, at that income, you can see that it's more, and it's a little bit, it's more for the single, a little bit less than the status quo for the family of 2. And I didn't figure it for the family of 4 for the. I haven't finished the work on Medicare. But you can start to see here that this is all universal health plan here, that the total cost they pay is a mix of what they pay under their Part B premiums to the government, to the federal government, and what they would pay to universal health plan to get the totals here. Again, this committee needs to discuss what percentage of the Part B premium to credit to the universal health plan healthcare personal income tax. All right, I can bring it up, but I'll stop sharing to help with the discussion. But it gives you an idea of how they might compare. And part of what I want you to think about is how is the best way to present it? It's your mind glazes over when you look at a spreadsheet that's scrolling like that. I can put it on a slide. So we're comparing 2 things. We're comparing status quo versus universal health plan at the same income, and then we're also comparing one income versus another income. And then the third dimension, kind of in a cube, is small family size and a large family size. And all of those we're trying to show, is it fair? Does it make sense? So anyway.
Yeah, no, Richard, I was realized on me. I was going to say thanks. That was so helpful. Mimi, go ahead. And then I got some follow-up.
Thank you. Yes, Richard, thank you so much. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind specifying again exactly the parameters of the universal health plan that you were describing to get to those numbers so everyone understands what we're looking at. Thank you.
Oh, Richard,
right now or just in general?
oh yeah,
Just
when you were
for the
doing
one that you just showed.
yeah, the table.
Like,
Were we using the tax table, or were we looking at the old just flat rate?
No, I was using the tax table
Got it,
with,
okay.
with the, with the settings that we had when I first presented it a few minutes ago.
Yep. Perfect, thank you. Go ahead, Charlie.
So I would say that from the presentation that Richard just did, it's very clear that the way it's set up without the EPT credit, those who are employed at a fairly modest, well, not a modest income, but a little bit above median income, start to pay more with the universal health plan. And for self-employed, you can have really high incomes and you do a lot better with the universal health plan parameters that we have. So that I just wanted to point that out. So that's one of the, that sort of looking at that sort of data is what makes some of us think maybe we should have some EPT credit. So that's essentially the justification for that, or a part of the justification for that. So I'll stop there.
Actually, Charlie, I wanted to touch on two things, and maybe what you just said there is about the EPT credit is I think at the most simple level, some of the feedback from the board was, I guess maybe just a little confusion about the mechanics, but I think what was not maybe resonating as clear is what you just articulated. Why have the credit at all, right? What's the purpose of the credit, and how do we understand it with respect to the questions of income and household size? So can you articulate a very clear point here? And I want folks to kind of say like, yes, I think having the credit is a really good idea, and we should continue to have it. And we just need to explain it and show some options for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to continue to show some options that do have at least some of the EPT credit. And again, the reasoning for it is to compare. One of the things that we sometimes talk about in forming this universal health plan is we don't need to raise new revenue. We basically are repurposing, expenditures that are already made. And one of the things that we might want to try to do is make it so that those expenditures are not vastly shifted from where they come now. And so in trying to make it so that there isn't a vast shift, you end up thinking about things like the employer payroll tax credit. And I think it's best just to come up with a scenario that has some and show in the manner that Richard did what that effect would be. So
great. That's super helpful. And I'll just call the question to the group. Does that sound like a reasonable way to proceed here with showing some of the effect of varying levels of the tax credit of the payroll tax for individuals and its contributions to kind of pre and post performance? I guess. Oh, yeah. Bethany says yes. Not. Am I getting head nods? Yes, from other folks.
I agree.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. Jeff, John, Mary Lou, you're good with that? Great. I want to go back to then another point that Richard made with the comparisons is particularly sort of performance and contributions, with status quo and UHP at the higher income levels. And this was really related to questions around the soft cap and the use of the soft cap. And I think and correct me if I'm wrong, Mimi and Cheryl and Mary Lou, the feedback from the board was making sure that we were, designing an equitable structure and that those who are able to pay more are contributing more. And but then I think also there from this group is concern here is that we shouldn't, there are limits to that, right? Around sort of what's the right number, and that's always kind of maybe in the eye of the beholder. But in the sense that I think practically didn't want it to be seen as a disincentive for employment and household location decisions of individuals because of the level of the tax, particularly related to what their existing contributions look like today. Yeah, great. Mary Lou, jump in because I think here I'd be good to hear folks thinking on sort of how we've designed the tax table and whether or not you even need a soft cap or whether we should continue to have a soft cap. Mary Lou, then Charlie.
Well, I guess just from some of the stuff that I was reviewing on some meetings back or whatever, I don't know, it was Echo or somebody gave us the number that there's like between 25 and 30,000, quote, really high income earners in this state, that people who earn more than $500,000 a year. I mean, is that I saw two numbers. I saw 25,000 one number on one slide or one something and 30,000 on another, but basically about the same. And then, I'm being careful about what I say here, but I think John Santa has, said if we had a list of those people, we would find a lot of highly paid specialist physicians on that list. And that not only do, and then I've read the stuff about do people really leave the state because of tax issues or not? But there's this kind of thing floating out there that if the high income earners, have to pay exorbitant amounts that, they may flee the state. I tend to think that the studies show that that isn't, taxes aren't the number one reason or even a big reason. But providers, we have to kind of keep thinking in our heads too that we really don't want all of our specialist physicians to be fleeing the state. So anyway, it just kind of, on one hand, 25 or 30,000 people, to me, it doesn't seem like that great a number out of 4.2 million Oregonians. And so I guess I don't want to spend too much time or worrying about, what's happening. And when they have that kind of income, a lot of people that I talk to keep saying, too bad, too good, whatever. So it is a bit of a quandary. And I just thought I would throw that in because I've been thinking about it. That's all.
Charlie.
So I will also say that the average AGI for those in the above 500,000 is about 1.2 million. So we should probably include, so 500,000 is just like the beginning of it. I mean, the average is 1.2 million. So we really should include some high income, some average high income people and in the scenarios that we put forward, I guess. And while it's not a lot of people, it is a big chunk of the income that exists in Oregon. And so I will try to quantify that too, but it is way less than 1% of the people in Oregon. But it is a big chunk of the income in Oregon. So
okay. So with respect to the soft cap, do we want to proceed down a similar sort of path of showing options without a soft cap, options with simply just replacing it with the, marginal tax, just continue on with with our marginal tax table, or make changes to that perhaps? I'm curious for thoughts, because it doesn't sound like we'll probably have consensus to have it go away completely. Yeah, thank you, Richard.
Yeah, so in the example that all we talked about in the last an hour has been on, you can see that there is no soft cap. You're paying 6.50% before you get into the issue of the household size and 6.5% after. So I just wanted to show that this thing does not have a soft cap in it and it extends indefinitely. That's all.
Yep. And if you actually want to keep that up, Richard.
Okay. Sorry.
So just so folks check on this, right? So the way we had modeled the soft cap before, right, was really looking at once you reach a certain total payment, then your effective rate would go down, which is a complicated way to sort of administer it, I would say, from a tax perspective. A similar way would just be to say, as you kind of move up the next income bracket, right, that the rate simply starts dropping. For so every other marginal dollar, you're paying a lower rate, or we can
just
keep it.
extend the tax table vertically.
Yep. Go ahead, Charlie.
With the way that this particular tax table is designed, it would be very easy to do what Morgan just said, because the rate becomes the same for all household sizes by the time you get to a high enough level. So there's some point at which and it's well before you get to $30,000 of income. So it would simply be just another marginal rate. And so that would actually be an easy thing to model. And my feeling is we should put at least one example of that forward for the board to look at, to have as something to think about. So.
Yeah, and I generally think that's kind of probably a good place to land on that, is because I think you're at a place, I think, as I think Mary Lou articulated, reasonable people can disagree on sort of the best course and it's still, and also the effects of that. And so probably showing to the board kind of an option that sort of I would say, let's move the idea of the soft cap to a marginal tax rate structure, because that's how we're kind of moving to implement, getting away from the PPP ID. So I think we can kind of still take the idea of a soft cap and move it into this sort of operation. I think it's just cleaner and also fits more about how taxes are administered in policy. And so I see some hands up, but I think what I'm hearing here is let's have an option here that just continues to have no soft cap, right? Everybody, the marginal rate continues. We can look at the revenue effects of that. And then we can have an option that sort of slowly, as we kind of move up, reduces that. So it takes that idea of a soft cap and shows sort of the effect on total payments as well as on total probably revenue raised. Cheryl and Jeff.
I want to let Jeff go first, and then I'll say something.
Another group I'm a part of was exploring the question on to Charlie's point, and so this came up about a week ago. In Oregon, the top 1% pay approximately 30% of the income taxes to the state. So just to elaborate on Charlie's point.
Yep. Thank you, Jeff. Yep. Cheryl and then Richard.
So my understanding is that we're going to look at options for both the soft cap and the EPT tax credit. Is that right?
That's correct.
So I think, I don't know if this will be a very popular consideration or recommendation, but here I go. Given that we have a deadline of the 13th to submit our response to the board, with maybe some tweaked, recommendations and, different communication, and we haven't seen those options in front of us because we just figured it out. I wonder if we might move the other meeting to the 13th. Mimi and I were kind of texting back and forth that we both could meet on in the afternoon of the 13th. That wouldn't be the same time, but that way we could kind of slide in with these recommendations. We'll have a better sense of what we're actually responding with. Because behind the scenes, Richard and Charlie would work with Echo Northwest and Mimi, but in order to get like full committee input, I think it might be a better idea to meet one more time before we actually submit it to the board. So I'm just putting that out there, and we can certainly look at schedules and things like that too. So.
No, I think we're moving quickly and getting precise about what's being said is important. Go ahead, Richard.
So we've talked about adjusting the soft cap based on different tax tables. So same spreadsheet, different tax table, and Charlie's overall spreadsheet will make sure we still raise the 16.9 billion or the 15.9, whatever it turns out to be for 2022. But then what options shall we offer, meaning Charlie build another spreadsheet that has a different EPT credit against personal income tax. I've shown you the ones, how it turns out for zero. what are the other options that you want to see? 50%, 25%? What are you thinking?
It's a good question. My sense is it's probably more important to show the elasticity of that. And so maybe like a 25-50 would make some sense. Charlie.
So 3 options: 0%, 25%, 50%.
Yeah, because we have the 100% one version, right? So basically kind of, or we can just do kind of a half. But yeah, I mean, my sense is like the exact number doesn't matter, but probably some understanding of how that moves from 0 to 100 is probably the important part.
Yeah, I mean, so I would say that we want to keep it small enough so that, I mean, one of the things that comes up is that the EPT is a higher rate than the HCPIT, at least if we do not have a credit, it is. And even with a small credit, it will still be. And so there will be times where relatively high income people, where it's all wages, would pay very little if the credit is high enough. And I think we want to make it so that keep the credit low enough so that doesn't happen to a very large extent. And so that's one of the things I want to just explore is like, well, where does that lie? And so I at least want to have a value that is maybe at the highest point where it still seems like it doesn't occur that high wage people pay too little.
Yeah, exactly.
And that would be sort of be a highest point, but I haven't yet explored where that is. I'm not sure how. I think I can explore that fairly rapidly, but we'll see. And so that might be the only one that I would like to explore, but maybe I'll see if I can come up with any notion of how to show the elasticity. It's more complicated than it might otherwise be, because when you change that EPT credit, then everything else needs to change to make up the same amount of revenue.
Yeah.
But I think there might be a way to show that as well. I'll see if I can do something with that. But
Cheryl.
I just wanted to say we need to preserve the last 10 minutes for the end of the meeting for public comment. So I'm just going to ask you, Morgan, if you think we have time still to go into the report.
I do. And I'll ask Sarah to pop on here. Great. And let's just roll through the first part. I don't think we need to get necessarily into the case studies. I think those are in there. And so just to help level set while Sarah's bringing the deck up, the research we've been doing on startup, transition, and operating costs and reserves, right? I think right, we're kind of don't have a target, right? We know the plan is 2030. So what the work, I think the value add we're trying to deliver here is to get your feedback on this based on our sort of professional or research and professional judgment of an approach that we can communicate to the board. Like, here's the problem, or the nature of the problem. Here's what we know about how these things typically work, and here's some recommended pathway and guidance as the UHP moves into the next phase, right? And so to me, it's like kind of that first preliminary piece of just trying to, get your arms around the nature of it, and then try to be some speaks with clarity on sort of the approach. And so I'll turn it over to Sarah here. I should do a quick introduction and just orient you around the memo that we sent. That part is really meant for you to sort of ask questions or their additional research. We've got some additional sort of feedback and research that we're doing to kind of bring this forward, but it'll be a section within your report. So anything you can hear to help us guide what we have, it will be very helpful. So go ahead.
Thanks, Morgan, and thank you for level setting, because I didn't do that last time. Neither of us did that very well last time. I think there was some confusion about what I was talking about and why. So yes, we're not intending for this piece of it to be necessarily a straw proposal, but maybe more like principles or recommendations for consideration when the program's implemented. And before I start, I just want to acknowledge that actually kudos to the board for thinking about this, because I've looked at a number of state plans and I don't see anything this like what I would call nuts and bolts about how to start. So I think it's good that you all are thinking about that. It's also very hard without dollar signs, so hopefully we'll have some of that soon too. Oops. So the key findings, and again, this is an update on our research and more kind of framing, and then some follow-up that you had asked us about last time. The way I see this, especially as somebody who has a legislative budget background, is that implementation of this program will entail several cost phases. There's a one-time cost phase. We're kind of in that right now. These are costs that are not going to be part of your operating model ongoing. Then there's a ramp-up phase, and this is really the highest risk phase. So I want to talk a little bit about that on one of the later slides. And what that means. And then you have your ongoing costs at program maturity. And your committee's work with the revenues and how to pay for it really focuses on that ongoing piece. But I think these other phases are important for you to weigh in on as well. And that's why we're doing this research. So the funding the money, how we're paying for this, and the financing, the strategy for paying for it, should align with these costs in terms of scale and in terms of risk and what risks are being hedged against. But they'll also depend on the organizational structure, the revenue availability. So there's some timing considerations and just a lot of things that are still unknown. So we're kind of trying to help you think through this strategically without knowing a lot of details, which can be difficult. We'll also note that a program at this scale really has no precedent in state government in terms of reserve requirements. So when you think about big ticket budget items for states, it's really Medicaid and K-12. States do tend to have budget stabilization funds for K-12 more than they do for Medicaid. I think that's related to the constitutional protections for them. But generally, when you're talking about Medicaid outside of one state, North Carolina, which was mentioned in our memo, you're talking about the state rainy day fund as the backstop. They're not setting aside this much money because it would be very difficult from a budget standpoint. And then we do have some case studies. I know we won't have time to get into them today, which is maybe good because they are, all of the programs have had insolvency considerations. And so I think it's important for you to look at the memo and for us to talk about them maybe in future meetings. But when you're thinking about reserves and why you have them, well, it's, it's the what ifs. And I think these case studies have various lessons learned that can be applicable here. So these are the three phases of costs that I just talked about. We're in this, I guess, one-time cost, before program launch where you're planning. You have potentially very sizable initial technology investments. There will be other aspects of investments that will not be, again, built into an operating model. This ramp-up cost period is where I think there's this most significant risk. So this is where the state would be implementing this program for a couple of years prior to collecting money, prior to making payments. You're hiring staff. It will be an ongoing cost. Any operational delay adds costs here. And then once you do start collecting revenue and caseloads are, the benefits are going out the door, there are lots of unknowns. So this is the point with any healthcare or human services program where you don't have great historical data. And so it's just kind of a higher risk period. And then, of course, there might be liquidity concerns related to the timing of revenues coming in and the timing of payments going out. So this is the piece where I think it's the funding and the financing are of significant importance. And then, of course, the goal is to be at an ongoing phase, cost phase, where you have known revenues, known forecasted caseloads, payments, your providers are engaged, and the program is self-funded at this point, including a reserve. So this is just kind of a graphical framework for what I just described. Operational risk more in the one-time the one-time cost phase, greatest operational and financial risk in that ramp-up period. And then once you get to a stasis, you have risk, of course, but hopefully it's known. Okay, so this is the kind of the meat of the presentation and sort of how to think about paying for transition costs. There are several options, and these are detailed in more detail in the memo, but in terms of state investment, this program could request an appropriation either in the capital budget for any kind of IT or system needs or the operating budget. This appropriation could be structured as a loan from the state so that eventually the revenues that the program is collecting could repay the state general fund for this appropriation. You have a bucket of what I'm calling own source, and this is more appropriate in sort of a public corporation context. If it's a public corporation, there is precedent in Oregon for these organizations to issue bonds on the credit market. Typically, that would be for a capital investment. You could consider a revenue bond, but those don't tend to do very well. They are not usually good financial vehicles for public entities, and we can talk more about that. There's also an option to pre-collect the tax. And so there's at least two precedents that we can talk about, or we can talk about next time if we don't have time today. And I don't know if this is legal. I don't know if there are IRS implications, but there are programs that have collected the tax for a period of time prior to deploying benefits. And that's another option for kind of paying for some of these startup costs and seeding a reserve fund. Of course, federal funding can be an option. In the past, there have been waivers that especially could be used to help with the technology investment needed for this type of program. Given the fiscal climate right now, I'm not necessarily sure that that would be the safest bet, but that has been an option, and I'm sure there will be more clarity in the years to come. And then on the right here, I have kind of grayed out this savings reallocation. And this is frequently talked about when talking about, transitioning from a Medicaid, Medicare to a universal healthcare system. It was mentioned in the California report and the Washington report, and it is definitely an option. I think any kind of savings would be realized over the long term, and it would not necessarily mean that you don't need that upfront investment of some sort, whether it's an appropriation or a loan. So that's why it's kind of grayed out here. I think it's a consideration. It should be built into budget models when this program would get to that point, but it's not necessarily something that I think could pay for the program on its own. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, what are savings here? Where do they come from? What savings are you speaking of?
Yeah, so, and this is again my kind of budget way of thinking about it, but so this would be like if you were, and I'm also recognizing that there's a lot of things that are still be worked out by like the operations committee that, I might be a little bit behind the discussions on. But so for example, if you were going to create a public entity that would absorb the Medicaid aspect of OHA, Medicaid would be booked, like if you moved it, it would be booked as a savings to OHA. This is like very, very oversimplified, to a savings to the state for OHA, and then it would come into the new budget, but like it would be like a net zero. So for example, in Washington, I was the Senate analyst at the formation of a new state agency that took other programs, child welfare, JR, and child care subsidy, and moved them into a Department of Early Learning. Well, it was a savings to those agencies. It was not budget neutral. Like it still needed a lot more money to create the new agency. So that's kind of the what I'm referring to as savings to the state, not necessarily paying for the creation of the new program. Cheryl?
Looks like Charlie has his hand up. I'll go last.
Okay.
I mean, so one other place that should be explored anyway is the current reserves in healthcare related entities, whether it be insurance companies or somewhere else. I think we need to look into that. I don't have any idea if some of that is possible to get, but it should be looked at. So.
Okay, thank you for the tip. I'll have to talk to Morgan and see if we can figure out how to look into that more, and maybe we can follow up too if you have thoughts about it. It's a good suggestion.
Yeah.
Mary?
Well, absolutely, with the CCOs that are basically all funded by tax revenue, and they all have reserves. And so that is, I think, a big issue and a big question.
So that might fall under this kind of grayed out bucket here of there's other potential sources that would be maybe savings, as in they would bring down the cost for this to the state because there is funding that exists elsewhere.
Yes.
Cheryl?
First of all, thank you for this pretty comprehensive overview of the reserves and transition costs needed. And I feel like I need to absorb the information before I have any meaningful questions. So it seems to me we'll need to come back to this in December, I would say. So what I want to say, and I'll let Jeff say comment too, that we really need to move on right after Jeff makes his comment to the public comment so that they have time. We have 3, so we need the time. So with that, Jeff, go ahead, then we'll move on.
Get myself unmuted. Thank you. And we can go into this to add on to Cheryl's comments to absorb and talk at our next meeting. In the memorandum that was sent out, that was included in our material, on one of the key takeaways in this particular topic was that the note that it was unlikely that the state would hold sufficient capital to meet a risk-based capitalization, and therefore we would need to use another metric for doing so. Is it, I'd like, at our next meeting, we get some elaboration on that. Does that mean it will not be an actuarial based establishment, but some other measure? And we can discuss, like, we can tell us more at our next meeting, or if you have a quick answer, yes or no, that works too.
Yeah, I have a quick answer, and I do think we need to talk about it more at the next meeting. Also, the actuarial piece and the adjustments there kind of directly relates to what you guys are talking about on the 13th, so maybe we can do it then. But the risk-based capitalization method would be such a dramatic volume of, like, it would be so much more than several months of benefits, because it's like you're planning for a worst case scenario. So after talking to Milliman and acknowledging that the state of Oregon doesn't have the ability to mint money, we felt that it was probably prudent to consider some other metrics, such as the number of months of revenues or benefits.
Does that meet actuarial standards, or is this simply another method that does not meet actuarial standards?
There are ways to structure it with actuarial standards, but they typically, I think that would be we'd have to look at it in the context of like how the rates are calculated too, and how adjustments are made on an annual basis. But there are, the NAIC has a kind of cash on hand, several months of benefit metric that they have used in other contexts. It's just, this is a lot more money than some of those that we've seen in the US.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Isabel so that we can hear our public comment.
Thank you. Yes, we have 3 people signed up for public comment today. As always, we really appreciate people sharing their public comment. Written public comment is also posted with the materials for this meeting. Written public comment can be submitted at any time via our website, and we ask that people send that 72 hours in advance of the meeting and sign up 24 hours in advance of the meeting for oral public comment. So our first person sharing today will be Lou. You'll have 2 minutes, and I'll get the timer up on the screen. With that, I will pass it over to Lou.
2 minutes is enough.
Mhm.
Hi there. Good to see you all. You're doing God's work here. I just want to say, on the matter of taxation, which I think you all agree is very important. Don't forget that this has to be, ultimately will have to be either passed by the legislators or the voters themselves. And I think it's a good idea to look at, and maybe you've already done this, but the average wage earner, the average family size, and
This morning,
who
Lou.
votes? Who are the voters? You have Medicare people, almost 1 million in this state. They vote. You have federal poverty level people. Do they vote? So I just wanted to point those out in case you haven't looked at that. I think it's very important. As to the comment of 1%, the highest 1% pays 30% of the taxes. There's many of us that feel that they could possibly pay more. So I'm not afraid of those people. And I don't think you should be either. The repurposing of expenditures is rightly said, Charlie. That is what we're doing. But I do want to bring to the committee's attention that it's the middle class, the medium wage earner, that really feels like they're the ones that's paying for everything. And I think there's some statistics that will prove that out. So thanks again for your hard work. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I'm giving you back 15 seconds here.
Thank you, Lou. And next we have Alex.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, well, again, thanks for all the great work the committee's doing. You folks are really doing an awesome job. really good conversation today. I just wanted to say I really like the idea of ditching the PPP, per se as a separate line item and incorporating it in that marginal tax table. That's great. Keeping the principles but still keeping it simple, like what Mary Lou said. I also think it's a good idea. I know at the very end, you're talking about the soft cap as well, integrating that into the marginal tax tables to kind of simplify things. I don't know. I hadn't heard before. I mean, you were talking about a $40,000 soft cap before. I hadn't heard any discussion about whether the number of exemptions would be in there. So I really, I like the idea of the larger families paying more along those exemptions. I think you should make sure that principle's incorporated in the soft cap. So that soft cap should rise at the high end with the number of with additional household members. As far as the EPT, I just want to reiterate, I think it's a bad idea. I mean, I understand Charlie's rationale and principles, but I think it still should be at 0. So for previously expressed reasons. Lastly, progressivity. I mean, you've heard it on public comments a lot, and I've heard it as well in public forums. My organization has done emphasis on that. I just think you may get some pushback if it's just a flat tax. So I would just like the committee to even consider some kind of progressivity. I know you can build it into the marginal tables, but I'm just a little bit leery of somebody saying, hey, I earn 50,000. Why is my tax the same as somebody who's earning $250,000 or more? So I just would like the committee to keep that in mind and maybe just incorporate something along the lines of like the current progressive rates that Oregon have, at least so you can defend it publicly. Thanks a lot again for your work.
Thank you, Alex. And finally, we have Linda.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I really liked the table as well. That was something new, and I think that addresses a lot of issues. It allows the household size to be incorporated in without having this separate per person premium. And I wonder, it made me think about the tax credits. Like Alex, I still don't love the tax credit idea, but I wonder, a lot of tax credits today also phase out at higher incomes. So that's maybe a thought, something to think about, is phasing out the tax credit at higher incomes. From a philosophical perspective, what I heard today and what I saw today was, there's a difference in comparing what's a self-employed person and what an employed person pay, and making those more equal. And then looking at, okay, what does an employed person pay today in the status quo, and what would they pay under the UHP? And those numbers looked a little scary to me, that it would be so much more that the employed person paid. But there's also the question of, is it fair today? So I guess there's an argument to be made that in the early stages of these conversations that I heard, there was an argument about divorcing employment from healthcare so that people could feel free to move around from job to job and not feel like their job was also their healthcare. And so I think we need to maybe come back to that conversation. I haven't heard that conversation in a while. And so I wonder if that's still a consideration.
Totally.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's everyone for today.
Thanks so much for that public comment. Really appreciate that. So it's looking like, according to the chat, we have quorum a quorum of our membership who can meet on the 13th of November instead of, I think it would have been the 18th. Tentatively from 2 to 4, although we haven't checked in with our Echo Northwest contractors, so we really want them to be there. So we'll keep you posted, and I imagine you'll get an updated invite for the time. So thank you so much for being flexible. I just believe that we have a little ways to go to get our recommendations finalized and look at those options together. So hopefully our hard workers can get those done in between. You know who you are. So thank you very much. It was a really great discussion today. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.